In the most desolate corner of an isolated town, shrouded in the cloak of perpetual twilight, loomed a sinister new house. This house, unlike any other, was an embodiment of dread, a relic of a malevolent past. Its grim facade exuded an aura of malevolence, and its fallen silhouette stood as a silent testament to a history drenched in terror. No one dared to venture near it, for it was whispered that the house was cursed, haunted by vengeful spirits that yearned for the living. One moonless night, a family arrived at the outskirts of this forsaken town. The Wilsons, Mom, Dad, and their 2 children, Timmy and Sarah, had been unaware of the ominous reputation that clung to the house like a shroud. Drawn by its eerie allure, they were ignorant of the horrors lurking within. Their first night in the new house was deceptively calm. The family shared a warm dinner, their laughter momentarily dispelling the foreboding atmosphere. Mom and Dad tenderly tucked Timmy and Sarah into their beds, their hearts heavy with the weight of an unspoken unease. As the clock struck midnight, an ominous wind swept through the house, extinguishing candles and plunging the rooms into Stygian darkness. Timmy, lying alone in his bed, heard faint footsteps echoing down the hallway. At first, he dismissed them as his parents' nightly vigil, but the footsteps grew closer, too swift and too stealthy to belong to any human. His voice quivering, he called out, "Is that you, Mom?" There was no response, only the sinister creaking of the floorboards as the unseen presence drew nearer. Timmy's heart raced, and he pulled his blanket over his head, too terrified to confront whatever lurked beyond. In Sarah's room, her once beloved toys stirred to malevolent life in the oppressive darkness. Her cherished doll, Emily, took on a life of its own, performing a grotesque dance across the room's perimeter, its vacant eyes now gleaming with malevolence. Her miniature car rolled eerily across the floor, propelled by an unseen force. Sarah, paralyzed with fear, huddled beneath her covers, desperately praying for Dawn's salvation. Morning brought no respite. Instead, it revealed claw marks etched into the walls of the children's rooms, like grotesque scars on the house's tormented soul. Timmy and Sarah hesitantly recounted the night's horrors to their parents, who, in turn, exchanged concerned glances. Though they were filled with trepidation, they could not deny the sinister reality any longer. As days blurred into weeks, the malevolent occurrences escalated. Doors slammed shut with a terrifying force, and chilling whispers, like spectral tendrils, wound their way through the house. Mom and Dad could no longer dismiss their children's fears as mere childish fantasies. They were compelled to confront the unexplainable. One ominous evening, after a harrowing dinner, they gathered in the dimly lit living room, armed with flickering candles and trembling flashlights. An insatiable curiosity drove them deeper into the heart of their unsettling abode. Their exploration led them to an attic door, a gateway to an abyss of forgotten memories, obscured by cobwebs and suffocating dust. With trembling hands, they forced the door open, revealing a room frozen in time. It was here, in the attic's eerie confines, that they unearthed an old, tattered diary. The diary belonged to a girl named Lucy, who had once inhabited this nightmarish abode. Lucy's diary told a harrowing tale of isolation and despair. She had been a lonely child, bereft of companions, and had turned to her dolls and imaginary friends for solace. Yet their entries grew increasingly unhinged, filled with frenzied accounts of voices emanating from the walls and shadowy figures lurking in the corners of her room. As the family delved deeper into Lucy's tragic story, they realized with dread that Lucy's spirit might still linger in the house, ensnared in a tormenting limbo. They could scarcely fathom the anguish she had endured, and they felt an overwhelming compulsion to help her find release. One fateful night, they assembled in the living room, determined to commune with Lucy's spirit, to offer her the salvation she so desperately craved. The candles flickered, casting grotesque, shifting shadows on the walls. Hands trembling, they formed a circle, beseeching Lucy to reveal herself. The room grew unbearably cold, and the candles danced erratically. A ghastly figure began to coalesce before them, and it was Lucy herself. Her spectral presence exuded a palpable sorrow, her eyes wellsprings of haunting agony. Lucy's spirit, trapped and tormented, revealed the torment that had consumed her. She had never truly departed from the house, her spectral presence clinging to the forlorn hope of finding friends to alleviate her eternal solitude. But as the years passed, her isolation had curdled into malevolence, transforming the once pure house into a realm of unending terror. The family vowed to be Lucy's friends, to provide her the companionship she had craved during her spectral existence. They offered her the warmth of their understanding and affection. As they did, Lucy's spectral form began to metamorphose. She became less menacing, her aura softening to resemble the innocent child she had once been. Over time, the sinister occurrences in the house dwindled, replaced by an eerie calm. The Wilsons and Lucy's spirit coexisted, forging an unholy bond between the living and the dead. Timmy and Sarah, no longer imprisoned by fear, played with Lucy's ancient toys, while the house itself seemed to sigh with relief. Yet, the darkness that had once plagued the house still lingered in its depths, a palpable malevolence that occasionally reared its ghastly head. Lucy, despite her transformation, could not fully expunge the stain of her own misery. The family's newfound understanding and companionship had brought peace, but the house remained forever tainted by its grim history. And so, the once terrifying new house was no longer a bastion of dread, but a realm where the living and the dead coexisted in a delicate balance between peace and torment. The family had offered Lucy the salvation she so desperately sought, but the spectre of horror still clung to the house's walls, a haunting reminder that some terrors, once unleashed, never truly disappear. You know, there was this new house we moved into a while back. It looked like a dream from the outside, all charming and welcoming. But there was something strange about it that we couldn't quite figure out. My family, including my parents, my little sister Emily, and me, couldn't wait to settle in. The first day was full of excitement as we unpacked and arranged our stuff. Everything seemed perfect, except for one thing, the old wall clock in the living room. Now this clock, it gave me the creeps from the moment we stepped inside. It hung there, quietly ticking away, but there was something off about it. Emily, my little sister, and I couldn't ignore it. That first night, as we lay in our beds, that clock got louder and louder. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It echoed through the house. I looked over at Emily, and she had this worried look on her face. "Jake, do you hear that clock? It's so loud." I nodded, feeling a shiver run down my spine. "Yeah, Em, it's kind of spooky, isn't it?" We tried to put it out of our minds, thinking it was just an old clock making noise, but things started to get stranger after that. One night, I woke up to use the bathroom. I glanced at the clock, and it had stopped. Dead still, with its hands pointing at midnight. I thought it might need new batteries or something, so I made a mental note to tell Dad in the morning. But when I got back to my room, Emily was sitting up in her bed, wide-eyed. She said, "Jake, did you hear it too?" "Hear what?" I asked, confused. "The whispering," she said, her voice trembling. It sounded like voices coming from the clock. I strained my ears, but all I could hear was the eerie silence of the house. I tried to reassure Emily, saying she must have been dreaming. Maybe it was just the wind outside, I told her. We both lay back down, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was not right with that clock. I had trouble falling asleep that night, and when I finally did, I had the most unsettling dream. In the dream, the clock had grown enormous, its hands stretching out like long bony fingers. It reached out to me, and I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I woke up in a cold sweat, feeling like the dream was more than just a dream. The next morning, I told Dad about the clock stopping and Emily's strange whispering claims. He checked the clock, replaced the batteries, and assured us that everything was fine. But that clock continued to be a source of unease for us. As days turned into weeks, more strange things happened. Sometimes we'd wake up in the middle of the night to find the clock ticking backward, its hands moving counterclockwise. Other times we'd hear faint, ghostly laughter coming from the living room, and when we'd investigate, the clock would be swinging back and forth on the wall, as if someone had touched it. Mom and Dad began to notice our anxiety and unease. They tried their best to comfort us, telling us that it was just an old clock with quirky issues. But I could see it in their eyes. They were starting to feel uneasy too. One evening, as we gathered for dinner, the clock chimed loudly, even though it wasn't supposed to. It wasn't a pleasant chime. It sounded more like a mournful toll. We all jumped in our seats, and Emily burst into tears. That night, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to investigate the clock myself. I crept down the stairs, the house silent as a tomb. The living room was dimly lit, and the clock seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. I approached it cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. As I got closer, I could hear a faint whispering, just like Emily had described. It was as if the clock was trying to communicate with me, to tell me something. I reached out to touch it, and the moment my fingers brushed the cold glass, the whispers grew louder, forming words. "Help us," they pleaded over and over again. It was a chorus of voices, and they sounded tormented. I stumbled back in shock, my mind racing. Who were these voices, and why were they trapped in the clock? I had so many questions, but no answers. The next day, I told Emily about what I had experienced. She was scared, but also curious. We decided to do some research about the house, hoping to uncover its secrets. We spent hours in the local library, sifting through old newspapers and records. That's when we stumbled upon a chilling discovery. Years ago, a family had lived in our house, and they had a daughter named Lily. Lily had gone missing one night, and her disappearance had never been solved. Could it be that the voices we heard were the spirits of Lily and her family, trapped in that clock? It seemed crazy, but it was the only explanation that made sense. Armed with this new knowledge, we decided to try and communicate with the spirits. We set up a makeshift seance in the living room, with candles and a Ouija board. As we reached out to the spirits, the room grew cold, and the clock began to chime mournfully. The planchette on the Ouija board moved, spelling out words. "Help us find peace," it said. It was Lily, reaching out to us from the beyond. We promised to do everything we could to help her and her family. That's when the clock suddenly stopped ticking. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted. Over the next few weeks, we learned more about Lily and her family. We discovered that they had been wrongly accused of a crime they didn't commit, and that's what had led to their tragic fate. We worked tirelessly to clear their names, and finally they could rest in peace. With their spirits free, the clock returned to normal, and the house felt lighter, happier. The once haunted clock became a symbol of our connection with the past, a reminder that sometimes even the most unsettling mysteries can be solved with determination and compassion. So, that's the story of our haunted new house and the clock that brought us on a journey of fear, discovery, and ultimately closure. It's a tale I'll never forget, and a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected things can happen when you move into a new house.